The following is a presentation by Judy Kiriazis of glassarttools.com, a website featuring innovative tools for glass fusers. We recommend enlarging this to full screen and pausing the video if you need to so that you can better see the details in the photos. Welcome to the second part of our series about ways to prepare glass so that you can add your own imagery and colors to your fusing designs. Today we'll talk about finding the best surface for whatever medium you want to use on glass. Glass can be treated to produce a variety of surface textures that receive paints, chalks, and pencils differently. Abrading the smooth surface of fusible glass to different extents can drastically change the effect you can create. Whether you use a sandblaster or grind your glass by hand to create a matte surface, silicon carbide is considered the best abrasive for glass. It's safe to handle as long as you wear a respirator mask, and it's produced in different grit sizes. The smaller the grit size, the higher the grit number, and the smoother the surface it produces. Extremely small particles are used to polish glass. Grinding glass with larger silicon carbide crystals produces a matte surface. Here's a close-up of some clear glass ground to matte surface with 80 grit silicon carbide. To give you a sense of scale, the curved gold lines are about 3/4 of an inch or 18 millimeters long. In the before fusing shot, let's examine the gold lines, which are Rouchet yellow-brown pigment mixed with propylene glycol and applied with a paintbrush. There's a tiny bit of feathering as the liquid spreads along the glass, but it's hardly noticeable to the eye at normal size. More important, the paint is going on with even coverage throughout the stroke. And here's that paint after a full fuse. To the naked eye, the edges of the stroke appear fairly clean. If you want to paint really fine detail, you can use much finer grits such as 120 or 220, but a sandblaster is best for that because hand working a matte surface with fine grit requires more time and effort. Okay, let's move on to chalks, the pink and blue vertical lines. This before fusing shot shows that very little of the material I rubbed on actually clings to the 80 grit matte glass. After fusing, although the color intensifies, the coverage is still relatively thin and somewhat mottled. In my opinion, an 80 grit matte is not the best surface for chalks. The red arrows point to 2 green lines of fusible ceramic pencil. And even enlarged like this, they look pretty solid before and after fusing. Generally speaking, fine grit matte surfaces are better for ceramic pencil drawing, with 80 grit probably the biggest you want to use. Now let's look at a clear piece of glass ground with 36 grit silicon carbide. You can tell by the way the light plays on the glass in the left photo that the surface is much rougher than the 80 grit. It's actually starting to behave like a sponge. There are larger pores in between the surface particles of glass, and those pores can soak up more of the medium you apply. Let's zoom into the before fusing close-up to look at the gold lines of the Rouchet pigment mixture. There is more edge feathering here compared to the 80 grit sample, but this might not be a problem if you're painting a larger piece or one without fine detail. Again, the paint goes on smoothly with even coverage throughout each stroke. And here's how it looks after fusing. There's no further spreading and the color is solid. Here's a small test piece that I painted with Rouchet pigments mixed with propylene glycol using a method that I describe in my website blog. After applying the paints with a paintbrush, I used the opposite end to drag the paints back and forth into each other. Propylene glycol as a medium creates a thickness similar to oil paints, so they cover well, although they do take about a day to dry. Being impatient, I went ahead and fused this piece wet with the kiln lid propped open about 1/4 inch. As you can see, the 36 grit matte surface allows the retention of quite a bit of detail. Moving on to pencils. The red arrows point to the green ceramic pencil lines, which have lost some of their definition after fusing. So 36 grit might not be best for pencils unless you're just making a rough sketch or drawing an outline that you're going to cover over. But I found that chalks love the 36 grit surface. As you rub them in and pile them on, more particles sink into the glass, which grabs and grips them. The other upside of 36 grit is that you can hand work a medium piece of glass to a matte surface in 10 to 15 minutes. See the third video in this series to learn how. But we're not finished with surface treatments. There's one more you should know about. This photo shows my test pieces before fusing, and the roughest surface of all is shown at the far left. It's glass powder that's been tacked fused to a sheet of glass. Making a powdered glass surface is easy, but it requires a kiln. You simply sift on a thin layer of glass powder over your sheet and tack fuse it to about 1250 to 1290 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on your kiln. You want to get the powder just hot enough to stick to the glass, but not so hot that the powder particles start softening. If you like working with this kind of surface, I recommend tack fusing as many pieces as your kiln will hold so that you'll always have some on hand. Fill the biggest sifter you have with your choice of glass powder and simply tap it gently as you move it over the glass sheet. You can match the powder color to the glass beneath, or you can sift on a contrasting color. Opal powders are better for this than transparents because opals will show up better if you apply a thicker layer. If you want to keep the grain of the powder distinct even through a full fuse, use black opal powder. Or if you just want texture, you can sift on clear powder. Keep in mind what medium and color range you'll be using because it's likely that a little bit of the glass or powder underneath will show through in the final fuse. It's the nature of this material. To give you an idea of how great the tack-fused powder surface is for chalks, here is a close-up of a drawing of a cyclamen flower that I started. You can see how I really piled on the chalks, rubbing them in hard. Glass-lined chalks don't blend like regular pastels, so I went for a blended effect by layering them. Some people suggest spraying everything with hairspray before fusing, but I just place my piece carefully in the kiln and it's fine. You don't have to apply your chalks this thick. In fact, one artist has success grading her chalks into dust, mixing them with water and applying them like watercolor paint. But I found that the most intense color saturation and the best coverage comes with a heavier application. Here you can see the full piece before and after fusing. I further blended the background colors by smearing them together using a paintbrush wet with plain water. After fusing, the colors deepen, as all glass-lined colors do, but the texture holds up and the background glass color is visible in spots. If I want, I can now paint on further details right onto this fused surface using my Rocher paint mixture, or I can use glass-lined paint pens with a fine tip to outline the petals. In fact, there are lots of possibilities here. You can create even more design options by manipulating your sifted powders before you tack fuse them on. Here are some examples where I sifted on black powder, then used our silicone tip color shapers to draw bold designs that allow the background glass colors to show through. After tack fusing, you can cover all or part of the powders with your choice of chalks or paints. Here's how I made my warm wave image using glass-lined chalks. I started with black opal glass, sifted on clear powder, drew through it with an angled colored shaper tool, and tack fused it. I then rubbed in 7 different colors of chalks, layering them to create a blended effect. The full fused result is on the far right. Okay, in summary, here's how the different matte surfaces stack up. 80 grit matte, shown on the right, is the best of the 3 for brushed-on paints where you want clean edges. Rocher pigment mixtures, shown here in gold and light green, provide superior coverage on any of these surfaces. 36 grit matte, shown in the middle, is a good overall workhorse that accepts most media well. Fusible glass chalks do best on a minimum roughness of 36 grit and can be applied most thickly on tack-fused powders. Glass-lined paints are fine on polished glass, and 80 and 36 grit matte glass as long as they are either squirted on and spread with a palette knife or applied using an applicator tip. It seems that glass-lined paints applied with a regular paintbrush make it difficult to get even coverage on less matte glasses. Your color materials might respond differently than these, but this information should give you a good start for further testing. Go out and experiment and have fun. If you want to make your own matte glass without a sandblaster or chemicals, watch our Part 3 video in this series. And please stop by our website to get neat tools and materials for glass fusing, all at a discount. Thanks for tuning in to our Glass Art Tools videos. Happy fusing!